Yo, what's good, E7 fam? Pat here to do another how to play video for Epic 7. And in this one, we're going to be talking about the limited character that I absolutely love to hate, and that is Fairytale Tenebria. As with all of my how to play guides, I'll be going super in depth and talking about most things you'd want to know about the character, including her stats, her skills, a couple of endgame equipment builds for you to try out and experiment with, as well as some pointers if you were trying to use the character in RTA. So, with the introduction out of the way, let's get right into Fairytale stats. Fairytale Tenebria is an ice mage of the Taurus zodiac symbol, which means she shares a stat line with Dizzy, Zeno, Solitary of the Snow, and Sage Balansaison. Taking a closer look at her stats, she has 1039 attack, 5299 health, 115 speed, 673 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, 18% effectiveness, and 18% effect resistance. This translates to a stat line that is well suited to a character that wants to try to take the first turn and use some form of debuffs. However, this stat line also means that this character is not really a damage dealer. That attack is really low for a 5-star in general, and obviously her health is low as well, but most mages have poor health to begin. She does have really high defense though. As a bit of trivia before moving on to the skill section, we've already discussed Tenebria's voice actresses, and you can hear those in the How to Play Spectre Tenebria video. For those of you who were not around when Fairytale Tenebria first came out, she is a character that is modeled after a winning fan art from a contest that Smilegate and Super Creative have held in the past. You can find the winning artwork on the artifact Fairytale for a Nightmare, which is the 5-star artifact on Fairytale Tenebria's banner. Fairytale Tenebria's S1 is one pair. It has a 1x multiplier and a 30 to 45% chance, depending on Molagora, to poison the target for one turn. This effect can proc twice, so that means you can land up to 2 poison stacks on an enemy. Before talking about her S2, we first have to talk about Fairytale's S3, which is Tea Party. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It is an AoE attack with a 1x attack multiplier. It dispels 1 buff from all enemies before applying unbuffable for 2 turns to everyone on the enemy team. It also inflicts Redirected Provoke to everyone on the enemy team for 1 turn. Redirected Provoke is a status effect that is unique to Fairytale Tenebria as of the recording of this video. Instead of you attacking the character that provoked you, you will instead attack the character with the highest health on Fairytale Tenebria's team if you are inflicted with this status. Honestly, I'm probably letting my bias seep through here a little bit, but I think that this is pretty much a terribly designed move, and it is where all of Fairytale's power comes from. She doesn't really have good attack damage, so therefore you can't really build this character as a damage dealer. However, her S3 is very akin to Bazaar in that if it goes off on the enemy team, there is a huge chance that you will win the game immediately. I would honestly say that this S3 is, completely backbreaking and one of the best things in the entire game. One of the best moves, period. Because essentially, you're going to strip all of the buffs from the enemy team when you use this S3. They won't be able to get buffs, and you remember from a lot of my other videos, I always explain that buffs are what win games. Barriers, immunity, attack buffs, those win games. So your opponent can't have them because of this actual attack. On top of that, it is a Redirected Provoke, which is in a lot of cases actually worse than getting silenced, because at least when you're silenced, you can use a strong character like Apocalypse Robbie or even like a Red Robbie. They have a powerful S1 that you can use to select a specific target on the enemy team and either severely weaken them or take them out of the fight. Redirected Provoke takes that away from you. It literally makes it so that everyone on your team attacks essentially the worst possible target at all times. So it's essentially, for those of you who have ever played card games, it's like time walking your opponent. They lose their turn entirely if they get hit by this move. It is incredibly, incredibly backbreaking. Fairytale Tenebria's S2 is Wildcard. It activates Shuffle whenever an ally is attacked by an enemy that is afflicted with either the Provoke status or the Redirected Provoke status. Shuffle can only be activated once per turn. Shuffle is an AoE attack with a 0.8x attack multiplier. It applies a random debuff to everyone on the enemy team for 1 turn. The random debuffs that you can receive are Silence, Defense Break, or Unhealable. On top of that, it also deals 10% of each of the enemy's max health as bonus damage. So yeah, Shuffle basically exacerbates the situation. If they haven't lost the game from getting hit by the S3, then when they finally do attack you with the redirected provoke, you will shuffle them for a guaranteed 10% of their health plus a little bit of extra based on your stats. And then there is a 2/3 chance that they either are going to lose their second turn because they're going to be silenced, or they'll be defense broken and therefore probably dead. The only saving grace, I feel like, when playing against Fairytale Tenebria, if she actually takes the first turn, is if they land the Unhealable on Shuffle, or you somehow resist or cleanse the S3. This character is, again, a very, very brutal character. Not a damage dealer, just a very, very powerful debuffer, and one that I think a lot of people groan when they play against it for the most part. She's just really, really strong overall, just because of the synergy between the S3 and the S2. When we take a look at her soul burn, it is an extra turn on her S1 at the expense of 20 souls. Normally, I always say the extra turn soul burns are really, really broken on a character, but I don't really feel like it's that insane on Fairytale Tenebria, because usually when you're playing this character, you know if you've won or lost the game immediately based off of how many, I guess should say, hits you get on the Tea Party, the S3. Usually, if you hit everyone on the enemy team with Tea Party, you've probably already won the game, and therefore having a soul burn that gives extra turns doesn't really matter. And again, she doesn't really do a ton of damage either, so it's not like this is a soul burn that can win you the game. Its best use is for you to essentially take turns off of the cooldown of your S3 so that you can use it again in a longer, more prolonged fight, so that you can, try to set up another redirected provoke on the enemy team. It is perfectly fine for what this character does and what her kit is trying to accomplish, but overall, it's just kind of weak because it is on a character that can't really capitalize on it. It's basically like just saying you spend 20 souls to remove 1 turn cooldown off of your S3. When it comes to Molagora priorities, you pretty much just want to invest into this S3 here, Tea Party first. You want to give it a -1 turn cooldown. And honestly, that's it. This is not a damage dealer, so you don't really need to heavily invest into it. After that, S1 is the next best option simply because it has the effect chance, but I probably don't even think you need that because, again, all of the power of this character is in the S3 and in the S2. And last is the S2 for maxing, because all you get is bonus damage on it. This is not a damage dealing character. You don't really care about how much damage Wildcard does. It already does a minimum of 10% of the enemy's health. So if you want to juice it up and you really like this character, by all means. But I think for most people who are playing this character, +3 is the minimum. And then if you really just want that effect chance, you can go +4 here as well. Pretty much +7 is the highest I would go. I don't really think you need to go much more unless this really is your waifu and you just want to express your devotion to her or something. So I'm not going to lie to you, Fairytale Tenebria is pretty much a one-trick pony character. She feels super degenerate when she's doing what she wants to do, which is landing all of the debuffs on her S3 Tea Party. As I've stated in the last section, landing Tea Party feels like an auto-win in many scenarios because the opponent doesn't really get to play the game, and it's only made worse when you factor in the debuffs from her S2 Shuffle, as well as artifacts such as Abyssal Crown. Her utility outside of getting max value off of her S3 is basically non-existent. She feels like a nearly useless character in almost every single PvE game mode. On top of that, her potential as a damage dealer isn't really that high either. If you wanted to build her as a DPS, the only way it would be viable is if you put a ton of provokes on your team so that you could get a lot of S2 procs, and honestly, it doesn't have the greatest multiplier. On top of that, you'd have to make sure that your S3 actually lands to get its provoke as well. And at that point, I think you're better off just going for a non-DPS build and letting everyone else on your team do the heavy lifting for you. For builds, there really is only one good build I feel on this character, and that's a speed build, but I'm at least going to show you two variations of it. One that is blazing fast that you may or may not already be aware of, as well as a slower, tankier build whose entire purpose is to throw your opponent for a loop when they expect a fast one. The first speed build is just going to be a build that is trying to go as fast as possible, and as such, the offset doesn't really matter on it. Just as long as you have 4 speed pieces, the other 2 set pieces don't matter. Ideally, you would like hit and immunity. For all of my calculations, I'm assuming you are on a broken set, so you will not see that 20% bonus hit chance that you might be expecting, assuming I was on a hit build. Looking at the desired stats, we have literally her base attack plus an I-90 weapon at 1,564. The defense is the same at 983, which is just, again, base plus I-90. The 12,163 health is her base plus an I-90 helmet plus a 65% health accessory. 270 speed or better, emphasis on better. The faster you can go on this character, it's just going to pay you dividends. This character only really cares about going first, landing the S3. If you can't secure first, this character loses a significant amount of value. So as much speed as you can, your best speed gear, you probably should be putting on this character if you intend to play her. And if not, maybe it's your second best, or just consider not really using her, or the other build that we're going to talk about. One of those options. Not a damage zone, so we don't need critical hit chance or critical hit damage. For effectiveness, 150% is the absolute lowest I could go. If you can get over 200 or even like 220, 230 with really high speed, that's awesome. Go for it. But I think 150 is the lowest that I'd be willing to go. When we take a look at the right side here, we are going to be on an HP percentage necklace. Although, if you have like something crazy like a 22, 25 speed crit damage necklace, you can use that, because again, we only care about speed. Ideally, you'd want health though in this slot, and I'm assuming for my calculations I am on an HP percentage necklace. For ring, I think you really want an effectiveness ring. That 65% is a lot to lose. It's very difficult to make that up. It usually takes like 3 pieces worth to get that amount of effectiveness for a character. So you really do not want to let that ring go by. You definitely want to be on the effectiveness ring if you can. Boots is obviously speed, because again, all we care about is going first. For the artifact, I'm assuming you're on to Hagel's Ancient Book, because it is a 4-star, and it is a really powerful option, because getting 20 souls at the start fuels a lot of other really powerful characters that you could pair her with. Think of things like Pavel, or even like a Fairytale Tenebria. And not everyone has the alternative, which is Abyssal Crown. I personally play mine on my spare Abyssal Crown, because Politis is holding my main Abyssal Crown. But Abyssal Crown is great because if for some reason you fail to proc one of the debuffs on your S3, it gives you another chance to save the game by proccing stuns on the enemy team. And it is particularly backbreaking when it happens. So those are the two that I think you should play. You could probably play Siren if you wanted to, but I really think Tehagels and Abyssal are the two best options for most players in most scenarios. Looking at the per piece average, we want 13% effectiveness or more per piece, 16 to 17 speed per piece, and some amount of HP or defense, because they're literally the only other stats that matter, so you might as well try and get those as your 3rd and 4th piece slots. The second build to talk about for Fairytale is a variation of the first build. It borrows from the logic that Bazaar players used to use in the past. Everyone assumes that you have a really fast Bazaar, so therefore they try to bring a character that's fast to contest it, or they try to bring a really fast cleanser, and then at the end of the day, it's actually a much slower Bazaar that's really tanky and hard to get off the board. You can use that same logic here for Fairytale Tenebria, which is why I have named the build a slow/tricky build, because it basically subverts your opponent's expectations. Anytime you're unpredictable, it is usually a very powerful thing. The primary set is still speed, and you can use broken offsets if you want, just like we talked about with the first build, because again, speed gear is at a premium. This is still a reasonably fast build. It's just not as fast as the first one that we were talking about. Hit would probably be ideal, or immunity, depending on how slow you're going to go. And I'll explain that more in a second when we talk about speed. Attack has not changed. Defense is 1200 defense or higher. You could go to 15 if you want to drop your Fairytale Tenebria to even slower speeds than the one that I'm going to show you here. 14k health or better, so that way you have some bulk and you can survive a hit in case for some reason their opener does outspeed you. Obviously, you want to be able to at least take a hit, so they're gonna, basically try to focus you here, right? So you don't want to be able to just die in one hit. That's the logic here. Higher health and defense for sure. For the speed, I have 240 here, and how fast this actually is going to be depending on the bracket that you are actually in World Arena. For me, 240 speed is slower than Maid Chloe and a lot of other cleansers like Mediator Quirk, who are in the 250 bracket range most of the time for speed. So I'm going behind them so that way if they blow their cleanse or anything, if they use their S3 for their attack buffs, I'm going behind them and I can punish them for using that move. For you, if you are in a bracket where it's like 220, 230, or even slower, you want to be 10 speed slower than where you expect the cleansers and the openers to be, and you want to adjust the health or defense accordingly. So obviously, as you go slower, you want to jump the defense on this character higher. So if you are in like the 200, 210 range for this Fairy Tale, that defense better be like 1500 or so. For the critical hit chance and damage, nothing has changed because we are not a damage character. For effectiveness, since we don't need to go all in on speed, we can focus more on getting the effectiveness, which is why I have it set to 200. Again, whatever your gear allows. If you can't get 200, that's fine. If you can go more than 200 effectiveness, that is also fine. Again, the takeaway here isn't so much the numbers. I'm trying to instill upon you the concept of playing a character that is slower than the enemy anticipated so you can punish them because you're going behind their cleansers. When we take a look at the right side gear, you are on an HP percentage necklace, although again, depending on the speed, you might switch to something else, whether that's defense percentage necklace, crit chance percentage necklace, whatever you get to make the stats, the speed that you want line up. The ring, I still think you want it on effectiveness because it's just too much stats to give up. Boots is obviously still speed. Artifact hasn't changed here as well. I think Abyssal is probably a little bit more suited to this build because you really want to make sure that that S3 has an impact. The faster one has the luxury of cycling faster, so they might be able to get more reps. I really think if you're on the slow build, you need to make sure that you land all the debuffs and that it really sticks. So that's why I think Abyssal is probably a bit better here on this build. Looking at the per piece average, it's 23 effectiveness or higher, 12 speed or higher, and some amount of HP or defense around 6 to 7% each. Before we talk about teammates and good matchups, we first have to cover the bad matchups for Fairytale Tenebria. The worst matchup by far for this character is Fallen Cecilia, and if that confuses you, allow me to explain why. Epic 7 processes buffs at the start of a fight based on speed. So, Fallen Cecilia gives her entire team a barrier at the start of the fight. The immunity set also processes at the start of the fight and gives characters a one-turn immunity buff. If Fallen Cecilia is the fastest character on her team, it will process the barrier as the leftmost buff first, followed by the immunity buff on the characters. What this means is that if you use your S3 with Fairytale Tenebria on a Fallen Cecilia team, anyone that is slower than Fallen Cecilia will have the barrier removed first and not the immunity, so you will not get any of the follow-ups on the actual enemy team. So for that reason, Fallen Cecilia is by far the worst matchup because there's a chance that your character has literally zero impact if she is the fastest character on the enemy team. So you basically don't even get to play the game with the character. So if you are going to be drafting Fairytale Tenebria and World Arena, make sure you have Fallen Cecilia or you have banned Fallen Cecilia first. The next characters to talk about are Designer Lilibet and Mediator Quirk. These two characters do not need any effect resistance in order for them to do their job and cleanse the team from Fairytale Tenebria. So there is pretty much a guarantee that these characters are going to shut you down if they at least get a turn, and they usually will because they're most likely going to be built tanky. They are just full cleansers, and there's just not very much that Fairytale can do to interact with them, so you want to avoid them. The other bad matchups I want to quickly highlight are Violet, Champion, Zerato, and Rowana. Violet obviously has a 100% chance to dodge everything Fairytale does, which makes her pretty much useless against him. And considering how good of a 1v4 soloer he is, you really need your picks to have a lot of impact so that that doesn't happen. Champion Zerato can reflect, redirected, provoke, and we talked about how powerful that debuff is. If it lands on your team, you're going to be the one that's going to be losing a lot of turns and potentially losing the game. And then finally, there is Rowana, which is something I think a lot of people overlook. Stella Harpa is a really powerful Soul Weaver artifact that can cleanse a lot of the debuffs that Fairytale sends your way. And then on top of that, Shuffle is an additional attack, which means that there's 2 chances to proc that Stella Harpa. And then also they get that heal and that CR push, which means they might be able to actually snap out of it before you really get to take super advantage of the actual character. When talking about good matchups for Fairytale, the first one we really have to talk about is Angel of Light Angelica. Fairytale is a faster character, at least at the base speed level, than Angelica, so you should be able to get the drop and go first against her. The S3 Tea Party of Fairytale applies unbuffable as well as redirected provoke to the entire enemy team. This will trigger Angelica's S2 passive, but because unbuffable is applied first, that is what will get cleansed and still leave the entire team provoked. That means that if Angelica was going second anyway, her S1ing will trigger your S2 passive Shuffle, which will clear away those skill nullifiers and potentially leave them with even more debuffs, which allows you to bypass their Angelica and basically get rid of what would arguably be the scariest character in a fight. Other things that Fairytale are good against are a lot of fast or aggressive characters. Basically, most of the meta DPSs, the cleave characters that you see, a lot of the neutral picks, she's very, very, very good against them. Honestly, the only things that she's really bad against are the things that we talked about in her bad matchups. And finally, let's talk about teammates for Fairytale Tenebria. You guys probably should have already guessed it by now, but the number 1 teammate for Fairytale Tenebria is Fallen Cecilia. If you have Fallen Cecilia, they can't have it, so your worst matchup is instantly out the door. On top of that, she has a 100% chance to provoke on her S1, which means she can proc Shuffle for your Fairytale early and often. Obviously, other characters that have provokes in their kit, such as like a Crimson Armin or like a Blue Crow, are great as well. And then you want to be playing characters that are really good with Tehegel's Ancient Book. Usually, Fairytale Tenebria will either be on that Tehegel's Ancient Book or the Abyssal Crown, like we talked about in the equipment section. So, obviously, characters like Spectre Tenebria or Pavel are great with her because they can use those extra souls in order to completely cleave through the enemy team if you're trying to play something that's very, very aggressive. Obviously, other high-powered DPS work really well with Fairytale Tenebria as well. Things like Luna, things like Straze. Anything that basically, if they can guarantee get a turn, cause mass destruction is amazing with Fairytale Tenebria because her S3, again, pretty much guarantees that your whole team gets to execute their first turn and do whatever they want. And that's going to do it for the How to Play guide on Fairytale Tenebria. As always, if you are looking for a specific How to Play character, let me know down in the comments below or join my Discord and ask me directly if you want help on building said character. If you want to check out more How to Play videos that I've done for Epic 7, like this one, there should be a playlist on your screen now. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow when we talk about the balance adjustment preview. Until then, later.